A low mist hangs over the forested hills of central West Africa. Before the sun burns it away, the land is quiet. Too quiet for an empire that has ruled here for generations. Beneath towering silk cotton trees, a city waits. Kumasi does not look like a battlefield. It looks like a capital at rest. Courtyards breathe with the slow rhythm of morning. Drums lie silent. Somewhere beyond the walls, birds scatter as if startled by something unseen. What no one standing in this moment can yet see is that the center of this world is already under threat, not by cannons or soldiers, but by a demand that will turn silence into war. This is not a kingdom built only on force. It is built on memory, lineage, and something far older than any flag carried in from the coast. Power here does not sit on a throne of wood or stone. It does not belong to a single ruler's body. It exists in an object that no one is allowed to touch the ground. An object said to have descended from the sky. An object that contains the soul of an entire people. The Golden Stool. Before the British ever marched inland, before treaties and gunboats and maps redrew the region, the Asante world already had a constitution, one not written on paper, but carried in ritual. The Golden Stool is not a symbol of kingship. It is kingship. It embodies the spirit of the Asante nation itself, the living, the dead, and those yet unborn. No ruler owns it, not even the Asantehene. He rules on its behalf. To remove it, to sit on it, or to claim it as property is not political provocation. It is spiritual annihilation. This is why the ground beneath Kumasi feels tense even before a single shot is fired. The Asante Empire is often misunderstood by those who encounter it only through colonial records. It is not chaotic, nor primitive, nor loosely organized. It is a centralized state with layered authority, a sophisticated military system, and a political structure that balances kingship with councils, lineage with law. Power flows through families, and inheritance follows the maternal line. Queen mothers are not ceremonial figures. They are kingmakers, advisors, judges, and, when necessary, leaders. This matters more than anyone arriving from Europe will realize. By the late 19th century, British influence has already pressed hard against Asante sovereignty. A series of Anglo-Asante wars has weakened the empire, but not erased it. Each conflict has ended not with submission, but with uneasy pauses. The British leave. The Asante rebuild. The Golden Stool remains untouched. From the British perspective, this persistence looks like defiance. From the Asante perspective, it is survival. Colonial administrators arrive with a very different understanding of power. They see authority as something that can be transferred, seized, or displayed. A throne can be occupied. A ruler can be removed. A flag can be raised. What they do not see, what they never fully understand, is that Asante power does not collapse when a single man is taken away. It is distributed, embedded, protected by belief as much as by arms. As British officials push inland from the coast, they carry maps that flatten the land into borders and resources. Gold, timber, strategic routes. They do not carry the weight of what already exists there. Negotiations are framed as administrative matters. Agreements are drafted as if sovereignty is a technical detail. Each step forward is justified as order, progress, civilization. But every step feels to the Asante like erasure. If you stay with this story, if you follow it to its end, you'll see how a single misunderstanding about power ignited a war no one could easily control, and why the outcome still echoes far beyond this forest. Hit subscribe and like the video. You won't want to miss what comes next, because by the end of this story, you'll understand how one demand spoken casually by a colonial governor, turned into one of the most extraordinary acts of resistance in African history. Long before that demand is spoken, warning signs are everywhere. British forts appear at the edges of Asante territory, justified as protection for trade. Military patrols test routes once guarded by Asante scouts. Diplomacy becomes thinner, more impatient. The British speak increasingly of protectorates, of indirect rule, of bringing Asante governance into alignment with imperial administration. To the Asante Council, these words are not neutral. They are alarms. Council meetings stretch long into the night. Chiefs argue, elders caution restraint. War leaders remember earlier defeats and victories. Everyone understands the stakes. To fight the British is to risk annihilation by an empire with global reach. To submit is to lose something far worse than land. It is to lose the Golden Stool's authority, to accept that Asante sovereignty can be overwritten by foreign decree. And there is another tension, quieter, but no less important. Leadership itself is under strain. The British believe they are negotiating with a male hierarchy alone. They see kings, chiefs, and generals. They overlook the women who sit behind the structure, shaping it. Queen mothers observe the hesitation growing among male leaders who remember the cost of earlier wars. Caution begins to look like fear. Silence begins to look like surrender. In Asante political culture, this is dangerous because authority is inherited through women, and because legitimacy flows from the maternal line, women are not barred from power when crisis comes. They are its custodians. And when men fail to act, it is not rebellion for a woman to rise. It is duty. At this stage, no one outside Asante imagines what is coming. British administrators write reports filled with confidence. They believe resistance can be managed, negotiated away, or crushed quickly if necessary. They do not yet see the deeper structure they are pushing against. They do not yet realize that the question is no longer about taxes, treaties, or forts. It is about whether the Asante world will continue to exist on its own terms. The forest remains quiet. The stool remains hidden. But the balance is already tipping. All it will take is one sentence, spoken without understanding, to turn reverence into fury and political tension into total war. The decision is delivered without ceremony. British officers arrive with orders already written, their tone polite, final, immovable. The Asantehene, Prempeh I, is to be removed from his throne, not executed, not tried, but erased from the center of power as if he were an administrative inconvenience. In 1896, he is taken under guard, along with members of the royal household, and shipped thousands of miles away across open water to the Seychelles. The exile is framed as preventative, a bloodless solution. No war, the British say. No unnecessary suffering. In Kumasi, the absence is louder than any proclamation. The British believe they have decapitated the Asante state. What they have actually done is expose its spine. Governance does not collapse. Councils continue to meet. Chiefs continue to rule their territories. The Golden Stool remains untouched, unseen, unmoved. Power does not rush to fill a vacuum because, in Asante understanding, there is no vacuum at all. The stool still exists. Therefore, the nation still exists. For the British, this persistence is deeply frustrating. Administration becomes heavier. Surveillance increases. Troops are stationed closer to Kumasi under the justification of maintaining order. Colonial correspondence begins to describe Asante society as obstinate, irrational, resistant to progress. What cannot be bent must be broken, or so the logic goes. The empire has done this elsewhere. It will do it again. Into this tense equilibrium steps a man who believes clarity comes from boldness. Frederick Hodgson arrives as governor of the Gold Coast with a firm belief in imperial authority and its symbols. He is not ignorant of Asante traditions, but he does not respect their limits. To him, sovereignty is visible. It sits. It rules. It occupies space. A king without a throne is incomplete. A conquered people without a visible submission is unfinished business. In March 1900, Hodgson convenes a meeting in Kumasi. Chiefs, elders, and dignitaries gather, expecting discussion, perhaps negotiation, perhaps another layer of imposed control. What they hear instead is a demand delivered plainly, confidently, and with catastrophic misunderstanding. Hodgson asks for the golden stool, not as a metaphor, not as a diplomatic gesture. He wants to see it, to sit upon it, to claim it as the seat of British authority over Asante. The room does not erupt. It freezes. Silence spreads, not confusion, but disbelief. For a moment, those present cannot be certain they have heard correctly. The golden stool is not discussed casually. It is not displayed. It is not even described in detail to outsiders. To demand it is not just an insult. It is sacrilege layered on conquest, ignorance sharpened into threat. No one answers immediately. And in that pause, something irreversible happens. The British interpret the silence as defiance. The Asante interpret the demand as proof that coexistence has ended. Hodgson leaves the meeting convinced he has asserted authority. He believes resistance will dissolve once confronted with imperial certainty. What he does not see, what he cannot see, is that the demand has unified factions that had been divided. Chiefs who favored caution now understand that restraint will not save what matters most. Elders who urged patience now see that patience has been mistaken for weakness. Across Asante territory, messengers move quietly, not with proclamations, but with understanding. The golden stool must be protected, and if it must be protected with force, then force will come. The British begin to sense the shift too late. Roads grow dangerous. Supplies move slower. Scouts report unusual movements in the forest. Villages that once cooperated now close their doors. The empire's confidence remains intact, but its situational awareness is eroding. At the center of this gathering storm is a question no British official has asked. Who will lead if war comes? The Asante Hene is gone. Male chiefs hesitate, weighed down by memory and consequence. The structure of authority looks fractured to outsiders. But within Asante political logic, the answer is already present. Leadership does not vanish with exile. It waits, rooted in lineage, responsibility, and obligation. As preparations quietly intensify, one voice begins to cut through hesitation. A voice shaped not by foreign education or colonial rank, but by ancestral duty. The crisis has moved beyond diplomacy. The golden stool has been threatened, and that means the soul of the nation is at risk. War is no longer a possibility. It is approaching, measured not in marching columns, but in resolve hardening behind closed doors. When it arrives, it will not begin with a formal declaration. It will begin with resistance organized where the British least expect it, under leadership they never imagined. She does not rise in a battlefield blaze or beneath a banner snapping in the wind. Her authority emerges in a room thick with argument, hesitation, and fear. The council gathers again. Chiefs, elders, war leaders, men who have fought before, men who know exactly how devastating another conflict with the British could be. Voices circle the same conclusion from different angles. The risk is too great. the empire too vast, the cost too high. Caution dominates the room. Delay is framed as wisdom. Then a woman speaks. Ya Asantewa is the queen mother of Ejisu, a position that carries weight far beyond ceremony. She is a custodian of lineage, a political authority, and a guardian of the future. She has listened long enough. When she addresses the council, her words are not poetic embellishment. They are an indictment. If the men of Asante will not fight, she says, then the women will. The statement lands with force not because it is theatrical, but because it is legitimate. In Asante political culture, this is not a challenge to tradition. It is tradition asserting itself. Queen mothers possess the right to speak, to admonish, to act when the balance of the state is threatened. Ya Asantewa does not ask permission to lead. She invokes obligation. Her speech, recorded and preserved through multiple accounts, does not romanticize war. It exposes the danger of inaction. The golden stool has been demanded. That alone defines the moment. To allow such a demand to pass unanswered would mean accepting the erasure of Asante identity itself. Survival now requires resistance, not negotiation. Something shifts. What had been caution begins to look like retreat. What had been fear begins to look like failure. The council does not erupt into cheers. It does something far more important. It aligns. Authority transfers not through force, but through recognition. Leadership consolidates around the one figure willing to bear the cost of action. Ya Asantewa assumes command. Her rise does not dismantle existing structures, it activates them. War leaders are appointed. Messengers are dispatched across Asante territory. Fighters are mobilized not as a standing army, but as a network. Clan-based, terrain-savvy, and fiercely motivated. This will not be a conventional confrontation. It will be a war fought on Asante terms. The forests become allies. Paths known only to locals turn into arteries of movement and supply. Villages coordinate quietly, sharing food, intelligence, and shelter. The golden stool is hidden deeper, guarded not by spectacle, but by secrecy. Its protection becomes the war's central objective, even as military targets multiply. The British remain dangerously unaware of the scale of what is forming around them. Colonial reports describe unrest, isolated hostility, rumors of rebellion. They do not describe an organized command structure because they do not recognize it. The idea that a woman could unify Asante resistance at a strategic level does not register within imperial assumptions. Gender becomes a blind spot, one that will prove costly. Ya Asantewa does not position herself at the rear, nor does she rush recklessly into combat. She operates as a coordinator, a motivator, and a symbol of legitimacy. Orders move outward from Ejisu. Fighters respond not because they are coerced, but because they understand what is at stake. This is not a war for territory alone. It is a war for continuity. By the time British patrols begin encountering organized resistance, the moment for prevention has passed. Roads are cut. Communication lines fail. Small engagements flare and vanish back into the trees. What appears, from a distance, to be disorder is in fact disciplined pressure applied asymmetrically. The British fort at Kumasi, once a marker of control, begins to feel isolated. Inside Asante ranks, there is no illusion about the enemy's strength. Everyone knows the British can summon reinforcements, artillery, and soldiers from across the empire. But there is also clarity now. Delay will only strengthen colonial grip. Resistance, even if it fails, will define how Asante history continues to be told. As the first volleys echo through the forest, This truth settles in. Leadership has not merely changed hands, it has transformed the meaning of the conflict itself. What began as a dispute over authority has become a test of identity. And under Ya Asantewa's command, Asante is no longer reacting to empire. It is confronting it. The war does not announce itself with a single clash. It tightens instead, like a closing fist. By the time British commanders in Kumasi understand what is happening, they are already contained. The fort, intended as a symbol of permanence, has become a liability. Supply lines fray. Patrols disappear into forest corridors that refuse to give them back. Gunfire erupts without warning, then dissolves into silence before retaliation can be organized. This is not the warfare the empire expects. There are no open fields, no decisive charges, no enemy lines to break. There is only pressure, applied everywhere at once. Kumasi is surrounded. Asante fighters do not mass in visible numbers. They move in fragments, guided by terrain memory rather than maps. Paths bend around ravines and thick undergrowth, allowing rapid movement without exposure. Ambushes are brief and precise. The objective is not annihilation. It is containment. The British garrison is forced inward, compressed into the fort and its immediate perimeter. Inside, anxiety grows. Officers write dispatches that struggle to describe the situation. Ammunition must be rationed. Food supplies shrink. The tropical heat turns confinement into punishment. Disease begins to do what bullets cannot. Every attempt to push outward meets resistance that feels both omnipresent and invisible. The British deploy colonial troops, including elements of the British West India Regiment, trained for imperial service but unfamiliar with this landscape and its rhythms. Their discipline is real, but it is mismatched to a war that refuses to stand still. Artillery is brought to bear, yet its impact is limited by poor visibility and fleeting targets. Firepower exists, but it cannot dominate what it cannot pin down. Outside the fort, Ya Asantewa's strategy holds. She does not seek a decisive assault that would expose fighters to overwhelming force. Instead, she sustains the siege. Time becomes a weapon. Morale is tested on both sides, but the asymmetry favors those defending their homeland. Fighters rotate in and out, supported by nearby communities. The British cannot rotate Kumasi out of the forest. Colonial reinforcements are requested, urgently. Messages move slowly. Relief columns face the same obstacles as the garrison: ambush, confusion, attrition. Progress is measured not in miles, but in losses endured. For weeks, the siege grinds on. From the British perspective, this is no longer a simple suppression of unrest. It is a campaign consuming resources, attention, and credibility. The idea that Asante resistance could be managed quietly has collapsed. This is war, expensive, visible, and politically inconvenient. For the Asante, the calculus is brutal but clear. Holding Kumasi under siege demonstrates capacity. It signals unity. It protects the Golden Stool by keeping British forces reactive and contained. Every day, the fort remains under pressure is proof that imperial authority is not absolute. But time cuts both ways. The British Empire does not lack manpower. Reinforcements eventually arrive in force, bringing heavier artillery and fresh troops. The strategy shifts from containment to clearance. Villages suspected of supporting resistance are targeted. The terrain that once favored Asante fighters becomes dangerous as firepower increases and movement becomes riskier. Losses mount. Despite disciplined resistance, the asymmetry of resources begins to tell. The siege cannot be sustained indefinitely against an empire willing to escalate. One by one, Asante positions are broken. Supply networks strain. Fighters fall back deeper into the interior, still resisting, but increasingly outgunned. The Golden Stool remains untouched. That objective is never compromised. But the cost of continued confrontation grows unbearable. By late 1900, the outcome is no longer in doubt, not because Asante resistance lacks resolve, but because the British are prepared to pay a price that resistance alone cannot match. The war's military conclusion does not arrive in a single moment of defeat. It arrives through exhaustion, capture, and forced dispersal. Ya Asantewa is eventually taken in 1901, not in surrender, but through encirclement and attrition. Her removal marks the end of organized armed resistance, but not the end of what the war has already changed. The empire has prevailed militarily, yet it has been forced to reveal the cost of its authority and the depth of the resistance required to challenge it. Exile is quiet violence. There is no battlefield when Ya Asantewa is removed from her homeland. No drums, no last stand. She is taken far from the forest that shaped her authority, across an ocean that erases distance into permanence. In the Seychelles, the air is different. The soil does not recognize her footsteps. The Golden Stool is no longer in danger, but the woman who rose to protect it will never see it again. With her capture, British administration moves quickly to formalize what the war has already decided. Asante territory is absorbed into the colonial structure of the Gold Coast. Sovereignty is not negotiated. It is declared finished. The empire installs governance designed to prevent this kind of resistance from ever forming again. Surveillance where councils once debated. Regulation where lineage once ruled. On paper, the conflict is resolved. In reality, something more complicated has occurred. The British never sit on the Golden Stool. They never even find it. Despite overwhelming force, despite exile and annexation, the object that triggered the war remains beyond their reach. It survives not because it is hidden well, but because it is protected by collective will. Its power is no longer political in the conventional sense, but it is intact. Ya Asantewa lives out her remaining years in exile, separated from the land she defended. She dies in 1921, far from Kumasi, far from Ejisu, far from the forests that turned an empire inward on itself. There is no ceremony when she passes, no colonial monument, just distance. And yet, time begins to work against the verdict of conquest. As decades pass, the narrative the British tried to impose proves incomplete. The war they described as suppression is remembered differently by those who inherit its meaning. In Ghana, Ya Asantewa's name does not fade. It accumulates weight. She becomes a reference point, not for victory, but for refusal. Proof that resistance did not require permission, nor conformity to imperial expectations of leadership. When Ghana eventually regains independence, her legacy sharpens rather than softens. She is no longer simply a historical figure. She is evidence. Evidence that power does not always look like domination, that leadership does not always announce itself in familiar forms, that defeat on the battlefield does not erase moral authority. The irony endures. The British won the war. They annexed the land. They exiled its leaders. But they failed to dismantle the meaning behind the resistance. The Golden Stool still exists. The story still circulates. And the woman who led an empire into defiance without ever wearing a crown becomes one of the most enduring symbols of anti-colonial resistance on the continent. In the end, Ya Asantewa did not stop an empire. She exposed its limits.